Welcome to ENG 328, Study Session 7, Okara and Awono, Realistic Traditionalism. Introduction. In this study session, we will explore the works of Gabriel Okara and Kofi Awono. Awono is Ghana's most famous poet and major African literary figure who has worked in many genres. Gabriel Imomotime Gbain Okara was from Bayelsa State and Ijaw Nation in Nigeria. Learning outcomes. When you have studied this session, you should be able to establish the centrality of the images, the back and the front to Okara's poetry. Discuss the traditional models employed in and the message of some of Awono's poetry collections. Gabriel Okara. Gabriel Imomotime Gbain Okara was born 24 April 1921 at Bumoundi in Yenogwa of Bayelsa State, the Ijaw Nation of the Niger Delta in Nigeria. He was educated of Umualia and Yaba College of Technology. Okara started writing poetry in the early 1950s. He is one the oldest contemporary writers from English-speaking Africa. Although they are extensively anthologized, Okara's extant poems were collected in a slim volume, The Fisherman's Invocation, 1978, a quarter of a century after I received his first poetry prize for The Call of the River Nun. In 1953, Okara shared the same landscape with Clark, traversed by the many inlets and rivulets of the West African sea coast, and more particularly by the mass of creeks around the mouth of the Niger Delta. Yet, both were also influenced by European modernist school of T.S. Eliot, W.B. Yeats, and the Irish priest poet G.M. Hopkins. The tone that predominates in The Fisherman's Invocation is one of the gentleness, as when one meets Okara in person, combined with an overwhelming sadness as he moves effortlessly and economically among private, public, and cosmic levels. His use of nature may come in part from his reading in the English Romantic poets, especially William Wordsworth. His poem Spring is reputed to have spurred Okara to write poetry. However, such familiar bearings are quickly shaken by mutual and at times violent imagery and a bit reminiscence of oral traditional songs. Although Okara's prosody is yet to be analyzed, his sonorous verse undeniably are some of the spring rhythm quality of Hopkins' verse, which went as far as to foreground the speech framed to be heard at the expense of meaning. The Fisherman's Invocation abounds in nature imagery. According to Ngara, there are constant references to water, the sun, the moon, the earth, and so on. Also, running thoughts are images referring to fishing, canoes, paddles, nets, and water. Another aspect is use fertility imagery, which has sexual connotations. There are, however, two dominant images. The black and the front symbolizes the past and the future, or tradition and modernity respectively. The two are depicted in dialectical interaction with each other. As a result, the theme of the poem can be summarized as a reconciliation of these two apparently contradictory forces. In the view of Okara, the only way for the African intelligentsia placed on the horn of a dilemma by the contradictory demands and pressures of tradition and modernity, that is, the combination of the ideas from both sides. It's only the back caught in the meshes of today, and I see moons, past suns, past nights, and past gods reflected by the back trying to slip through the meshes like a fish. In the fisherman's invocation, the major motive used by Okara is that of fishing, which he skillfully wilts into artistic icons. The fisherman and his cohorts are fishing from a canoe. The canoe symbolically is that which ferries. It is the modulating principle of life, without which one cannot survive the pressures of history. It is that which provides one with moral principles and social values. The net is the means, the apron, strings by which the necessary network between the past, the present, and the future can be effected. The canoe must advance, but to do that, it must draw substance from a source with the help of the net. Now, the net brings nothing from the right side, nothing from the left side, but something from the back. However, the back is not easy to catch and bring up into the canoe. It comes after an enduring, meticulous, and persevering quest. It is heavy and can easily slip through the net. Draw gently, draw carefully. Don't let it slip. Draw it up into the canoe and let's hold it in our palms, the back, the guts, even for only one still moment, one teaching moment. The fisherman's invocation is Okara's most ambitious poetic work because, while adopting a deliberately non-political slant, it reflects through indigenous imagery the tribulations of nation building as well as the traumas that befall the self. Interestingly, what Okara calls the front as opposed to the back signifies both the present and the future, as if it were a translation of the imperfect tense in the sub-Saharan African languages, thereby setting the poem against a non-Western conception of time. To his fearful companions, nightmarish vision of the past as a desert or a dried-up well, the fisherman insists that the past may turn out to be a fertile, feminine body, an archipel, mother not to be defiled. There is water from a river flowing from the bottom of the back of the womb. 1978, Ditto 5. The fisherman briefly becomes a cosmic hunter, for the teacher's invocation is to stalk the back in the forest, stalk the back in the heavens, stalk it in the earth, stalk it in your umbilical cord. 1978, Ditto 5, which entails looking for the past in one's origin and development as human being. The mention of the umbilical cord is not fortuitous, for in Ijaw belief it is buried at birth in the native soil and thereby forces its owner to return to it at the moment of death. In piano and drum, the drum is a symbol of tradition and it is associated with natural images, the mystic rhythm, the panther ready to pounce, the leopard snarling, and the naked warmth of hurrying feet. The drum also associated with naturalness and life. Everything is galvanized into action by sound. The protagonist himself is turned into a frenzy of activity. And my blood ripples, turns torrent. In my mother's lap a suckling. At once I'm walking simple path with no innovations. The piano, on the other hand, only manages to produce discordant and futile tunes. It speaks of complex ways in tear, furrowed concerto. Instead of making him feel at home with his environment, it takes him to faraway lands and new horizons, speaking in such strange sounds as diminuendo, counterpoint, and crescendo. The piano is so much in disarray with its own complex system. It ends in the middle of a phrase at a dagger point. The poet is lost. He keeps wandering, not knowing rhythm to follow the tension between the past and the present in relation to the future, between tradition and modernity, is at its worst in this poem. According to Ungara, there is a strong element of romanticism in Okra's traditionalism. This romanticism comes out in the ubiquitous images of nature that occur in You Laughed and other poems. Through this collection of poems, there are references to the earth, the sky, fire, the sea, rivers, waves, fish, and other natural objects. In this set of images, we can see a combination of romanticism and traditionalism. A refusal to come to terms with world of modern technology. The drum is also a key symbol. 1990, Ditto 51. Okara is anxious to be guided by the rhythm of the drum, and following the rhythm of the drum symbolizes obedience to nature, being guided by tradition. He or she who refuses to obey the drum is heading for destruction. Kofi Awoonor. Kofi Awoonor is Ghana's most famous poet and major African literary figure who has worked in many genres. In Rediscovery Night of My Blood, 1971, this is one of the lyric laments expressing the Western educated Africans' drifting sense of loss and anguish at his or her severance from indigenous cultural traditions that have been cut away by perverting modernization. Night of My Blood, permeated by the returning exile's complex mixture of feelings, a weary fatalism alongside nostalgia for childhood joys and lost harmonies, longings as well as forebodings about what he will find. Awoonor's model is a heel dirge. Hence, a recurrent motif in heel dirge poetry is a thwarted or painful return. The ancestral pilgrimage after sojourns in alien and hostile worlds leads back to desolate land of neglected and ruined shrines, eaten by termites. It came one day at the dead of night, destroying the cement walls, and carried away the foes, the cooking pots and the ladles. The sea eats the land at home. In Awoonor's much anthologized poem in The Weaver, the Bird, which originally appeared in rediscovery, the rediscovery shrines are defiled by the metaphoric droppings of foreign religions and false political messiahs. The image of the weaver bird, notorious for its colonizing habits and its destructive effect on the host tree, allows Awono to open out into the larger theme of Europe's colonial assault on Africa's material and cultural wealth, emphasized in the poem as a process of desecration that leaves contemporary Africa with the task of rebuilding everything anew. Once invited in, the weaverbird returns in the guise of the owner, the tenant turns landlord, and the invader is indulged by the misplaced gratitude of indigenous hosts. We did not want to send it away until the morning after. The brooding, sorrowful tone of those poems is offset by pointed satire denouncing corrupt neo-colonial traitors who have abjured the magic of being themselves we have found a new land, to the lament for neglected gods and decayed shrines of African independence movements. According to Derek Wright, the dirge formats of worldly disappointment and frustration is a ready-made vehicle for the expression of the dwindling millenarian hopes of African nationalism and the subsequent post-independence delusionment. 2002, Ditto 65. The persona in these poems undertakes a journey that is both realistic and mythical, leading both outward into society and introspectively into the self. The speaking I of an Akpalu dirge is simultaneously the grieving individual singer and the voice of the whole community, plunged into the mourning by a death. Thus, it is through him that the community, and in Awono's imitative elegiac songs, are not isolated outbursts of private melancholy and statements of personal alienation, rather they function as expressions of a collective desolation and as an elegy for the spiritual death of an entire culture and the passing of an era. This is the night of the poet's blood in Night of My Blood. Superimposed in turn upon this pilgrimage is the modern poet, exile's circular passage of departure and return, rediscovering at last the wisdom of ancestors and ritual poetic traditions and submerging himself in their sustaining communal ethos. Ride Me, Memory 1973. This volume is based on the first years of his experience in the United States between 1968 and 1975. African memories crowd in alongside its anecdotes and larger political statements as Awono's moves away from the dirge, lament into other oral styles and into literary traditions outside his ancestral heritage. The range of hue forms is extended to include the halo, the healthy, vitriolic song of abuse, and the praise song. Under the first category come jocularly caustic portraits of meddling first world scholars. Under the second, earnestly adulatory of Black American writer, singers, and jazz musicians. A violent energy coincides with a tightening of the bonds of political commitment in these poems. Awono testifies to the sufferings and struggles of victims of the Black diaspora, especially under the brutalities and hypocrisies of the modern United States, which keeps breaking into his enjoyment of the company of the American oaths. Kofi Anjidoho have commended Awoonor's continued more sparing use of the dirge in African memories and its richly comic deployment of the halo in songs of abuse. The House by the Sea, 1978, recounts the prison experiences of Awoonor, having been enmeshed in political trouble after his return to Ghana in 1975. The prison poem as the center of this volume, in their remorseless examination of the nature of political involvement and responsibility, reveal a harsh, distilled intensity, a gritty sharpness, and brittle clarity that are new in Awoonor's work. This is raw, survivalist poetry, some of it written on toilet paper and smuggled out of his cell, urgently confronting the realities of political repression, torture, and assassination of African and global context, and posing ultimate questions about the nature of freedom, whether it is best served by the private pursuit of self-fulfillment or by the public service of unromantic revolutionary laborers. In his next collection, The Latin American and Caribbean Notebook, 1992, the harvest of his diplomatic employments and travels in Brazil, Cuba, and Nicaragua. In this volume, the poet is by turn self-defensive of his Nkrumah period and after, and self-accusatory. He presents himself in the historical present as a braggart, loudmouth, boastful, uncertain diplomat. Rio de Janeiro, fearful and lovely city, shunned off abroad to serve another country while his own is being wrecked by fools and criminals. The ambassador poet then proceeds from a position of comfort and privilege to project his own sense of displacement upon victims of the black diaspora in other lands. As we have noticed, Okara and Awoonor are guided by a consciously formulated aesthetic ideology, realistic traditionalism. Their poetry reveals certain patterns, the use of image of nature and things associated with the African traditional mode of life, the use of simple words, the creation of rhythm patterned after drum beat, the use of ijaw and ill modes of expression, and so on. All these are clearly linked to their authorial ideology, and in those few poems where images referring to modern technology are employed, it is quite clear that they are used to show the contrast in values that the poets are anxious to articulate. Study session summary. A close examination of the two poets reveals that there is no emotion in the manner in which they give expression to the ideological imperatives, except for few of latter Awoonor's poems. There is no attempt to sentimentalize the problem, yet the genuineness with which the poet articulates it and the lyrical quality of the verse speak of deep feeling. We have come to the end of study session 7. Thanks for listening.